Yeah. The only joke that comes to mind right now is the one about the obsessive compulsive divorce. Don't forget to close the door 6 times on your way out. That's it. All right. Yeah, because that's it. Because now I need to learn some new jokes for next fall. All right. So, and it's too bad because I told that joke because of something that you and I were talking about at lunch about fearing that we left the door open. Okay. So, the history of Judaism. Now, when last we met, by that I mean 2,000 years ago, back in the time of, Jesus, when people still went to the temple to offer their sacrifices, and at the time when Jesus lived, the religion of Israel was that there was the God of Israel who needed to be reminded every day that God was important. But you did not remind God with just words and songs. You reminded God by feeding God, by kind of bringing God food, bringing food to God's house. And that is what the temple in Jerusalem was there for. It was God's house, and you would bring food. For example, when your baby was born, like when Jesus was born, Joseph and Mary went to the temple and they sacrificed 2 turtle doves. And this actually was the discount meal, because when your child was born, you were supposed to sacrifice a lamb at the temple. But if you couldn't afford that, the Bible said you could sacrifice a couple of birds instead. Or when we read in the Gospels that Jesus went to the temple and saw that the money changers and the animal sellers and the bird sellers were there, and he chased them all away with a bullwhip. That is another reference to that when you went to the temple, if you were traveling from a distance and you couldn't bring your own animals, you could buy animals there in front of the temple. And to make it even more complex, you could not buy your temple animals with any money that had any picture of any person on it. So you could not use a Roman coin to buy your turtle doves or your lamb at the Jerusalem temple, which meant you needed money changers. So when you went to the temple, if you traveled from a distance, you had your Roman coin that said right on the front of it, Caesar is the son of God, which meant that by the 10 Commandments definition, it was an idol and it put other gods next to God. You couldn't spend that at the temple. So you had to take that, exchange it for temple fund bucks or whatever. Then you had to take your temple fund bucks and buy a lamb or a couple of birds, and then you brought it. And the temple we see in this artist's rendering, you're not allowed inside of the temple, but it's got these 2 big altars. And one of them is for grain offerings, and one of them is for animal blood. And these are the 2 things that God eats at the temple. In addition, well, I should say, these are the 2 things God eats, plus at the temple, God drinks. And the Bible is clear that God must be supplied with wine and beer with every meal, every day. So actually, the God of Israel, kind of drinking thing, which I don't know, might explain some of why the God of Israel was always kind of stormy and testy. It's like, well, you do kind of drink a lot every day. That's That's all right. Anyway, this is what religion was. Even Jesus never said to stop sacrificing at the temple. He famously said, if you are bringing your offering to the temple, by which he means a blood offering of like an animal, if you remember that your friend is angry with you, go, apologize to your friend, then come back to the temple and you still make that offering. So it didn't even occur to him that he didn't think there was anything strange about God eating and drinking every day. Anyway, this is what religion is in the Old Testament. This is what religion is in the New Testament. This is why when you want to understand Judaism and you say, well, I should read the Torah, you open the Torah and immediately it says, well, if you break your foot, go kill a bird. And when your wife gives birth, go kill a lamb. And you look at this and you're like, what is this? That's what the religion was. Until the year 70 of the Common Era. This is 40 years after the time of Jesus. What happened was Israel was a colony of Rome. And then during kind of a transfer, during sort of a messy transfer of power in Rome, Rome got distracted by some stuff that was going on. Some Israelite commandos managed to do this uprising. They kicked out the Roman centurions. They retook Israel. Word started going through the Roman Empire. The Romans have become lazy and distracted. If you want to kick Rome out, now is the time. And when news of this got back to Rome, they said, no, this is not what's happening. So they put together a massive army. They went to Israel. They crucified, by some estimates, 200,000 people. They crucified people until they ran out of trees. And they did everything they could think of to humiliate Israel and to get the message out throughout the Roman Empire. If you ever try to rise up and kick out the Roman colonial force, you and your culture and your religion will be utterly destroyed forever. One of the ways that Rome did this, they destroyed the temple. As they said, they left not one stone standing upon another. Today, 2,000 years later, in the city of Jerusalem, there is a wall. It is called the Wailing Wall. Some people say maybe this is the last few bricks that still remain from the Jerusalem temple. That is contested. That's kind of doubtful. When Rome said that they were going to take down the temple brick by brick, it is highly unlikely that they left one wall still standing. They did this thing. And it was this move to end forever the religion of Israel. Because the Israelite scriptures already said the only place you can feed God is the temple, there has not been animal sacrifice in Judaism in the last 2,000 years. That's over. If this situation in Israel should result in the construction of a third temple, then all of that stuff in the Torah comes back, and then every Jewish person on earth is going to have to go there about once a month with an animal to kill. That's a major, major logistical problem. So even if the Israelis today manage to do whatever it is they think they're going to do, it would still be unwise of them to build another temple there, because that's going to introduce a new mess of problems. That religion has been over for 2,000 years. Now, with the temple priesthood gone, And a priest is somebody who can perform blood sacrifices. With no more blood sacrifice and no more priesthood, the religion of Israel developed in this new way. There would not be priests anymore. You may notice the word rabbi means a teacher. It does not mean a priest. Like modern rabbis in Judaism, they will not slaughter your goat for you. That's not them. A rabbi means a teacher. And the main thing that a teacher, that teachers were needed for, was to figure out this. If there was no more temple, no more pilgrimage, no more sacrifice, could people continue to practice this religion? Could this religion be practiced in a new way? Could this relationship with God be expressed and enacted in new ways without feeding God anymore? And rabbis debated this for centuries. Just for centuries, rabbis just debated. Would it be possible to live by the Torah without following it literally? Is it possible to have this relationship with God without going to a temple and sacrificing animals? And if so, what was that relationship going to be? What might be an equivalent? How could you still feel like you were making that connection? Now, the rabbis debated this for centuries. And the debates, some of which were eventually written down, became a document that is known as the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is a set of laws that are sort of based on the Torah, but without temple and without sacrifice. And then this document, the Mishnah, this circulates for centuries, and there are 4 centuries of rabbis debating and arguing and debating and arguing, and eventually their arguments and debates become this other document, a document that is known as the Talmud. Now, this is a photograph, and this will be easier here than it is in a college classroom. Okay, now imagine this. If anybody here remembers an encyclopedia set, like that set of books, and it was this big. Okay, now imagine that you've got a single document that is as big as an encyclopedia, except that each volume, each book, physically, is about twice as tall. Like, it's bigger than the encyclopedia books that you remember. So this is a photograph of one of the 2 Talmuds. And this is, you could say, this is the sort of the scripture, the instruction manual for rabbinic Judaism. So yes, the Torah says when this happens, you kill 2 birds. But you don't do that at a Shabbat service anymore. So when you're trying to figure out, well, this thing happened, what do I do? The rabbi will open up one of these. Now, if you were to walk into a rabbi's office and you picked up one of the volumes of the Talmud, you're holding this big thing, you open it up, and here's what you see. A page of the Talmud looks like this. Now, here in the middle is Mishnah. So it'll say, for example, my first, when your firstborn, is delivered, is born, like sacrifice 2 turtle doves. That'll be a line from the Torah. Then here is going to be, well, such and such rabbi said this, such and such rabbi said that. Here we've got centuries of debate that is the Mishnah. Then here below it, such and such rabbi said this. Now this is rabbis arguing about this line of the Torah. This is rabbis arguing about what these rabbis said in the Mishnah. And like this rabbi is debating, he's arguing with this rabbi here who lived 400 years earlier. But they can still argue with each other, or at least he can argue with him. Now, and then around it are these chunks. And these are essays where such and such really respected, famous rabbi wrote a whole page about such and such, what such and such rabbi argued centuries before. So these things are organized. This is what a page of Talmud looks like. I mean, not to mention, it's all in Hebrew. And we read from left to right. Hebrew is read from right to left. Plus, the written Hebrew here, no punctuation, no capital letters. And biblical Hebrew, which I assume the Hebrew here is like biblical Hebrew, no vowels. You don't write vowels. We write vowels. So imagine now, if you can, see if you can, and I should have just made a slide of this because I don't even know if we can envision it. But imagine this. Imagine if you were reading 3 sentences in the English language, but there was no space between letters, no punctuation, no space between sentences, no vowels, only consonants, and you didn't know where one sentence ended and the next one began. So written ancient Hebrew writing, it's very, very different. But people can read it, and they can read it out loud. Okay, now, you've got all of this stuff. Hey, my baby was born. I'm excited. The Torah says to sacrifice 2 birds, or, like, oh, my broken leg has finally healed. The Torah says to slaughter a goat at the temple. What should I do? Where on this page do I actually find the right answer? Nowhere. There is no final answer. If the Torah does not give the final answer on something, then there will never be a final answer. Which means that you can't just skip to the last line on the page and say, this is what to do. You're supposed to study the debate and think for yourself. And then you got to make up your own mind, because it is your relationship with God. And your broken leg got better, or your sister's baby was born safely. You can't just follow some line of the instructions. You got to have your conversation with God, and maybe your conversation with God is enacted like this. Maybe you say, well, slaughtering a lamb represents giving up some food, therefore I'm going to fast. Or slaughtering a lamb is like giving up part of your wealth or your livelihood, therefore I'm going to sell one of my cars and give the money to the poor. Well, whatever it is, but there is no final answer. So the Talmud not only comes from centuries of debate, it also encourages debate. It is a sacred text that you can argue with. As a matter of fact, it's a sacred text that you are supposed to argue with. But there's a catch. When you get into an argument with the Talmud, you're not allowed to bring in like I heard something on a podcast. You're not allowed to bring in, I read this thing on a Google forum. Your arguments have got to come from your knowledge of Torah and Mishnah. We in this room, I think we are probably most familiar with Scripture, sacred text, as that thing that always gets the final word. And if you talk back to it, it means you are wrong. In Judaism, the Torah is like that. It has the final word. If you talk back to it, you lose. However, most of the instructions in the Torah involve animal sacrifice, which you cannot do. And therefore, when you need your instructions, you go looking in the Talmud, and then you are allowed to debate with the Talmud. You are allowed to argue with the Talmud. Which I think brings up an interesting question. Is religion a part of our lives in which our intellect is welcome? Is it a part of our lives in which we are supposed to silence our questions and our doubts and our arguments? In this really kind of unique, singular, fascinating case, you actually are. You're supposed to debate about it. The Talmud will never be complete. There are two massive documents, the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. They are in print. They are books. They're out. They've been the way they are for a long time. However, Talmud is still being generated. It's still being created. There are still rabbis who are still debating about things, and they'll put their debate into an email chain or a forum, or they'll write it in the form of a book, or in whatever form. You cannot say, because Talmud is not, the Torah is complete. It will never change. But you can't say that the Talmud is complete. And as the questions keep changing, as technology, economics, and politics evolve, rabbis will continue to extrapolate answers to new questions. For example, you can show up, if you're Jewish, if you're a member of the congregation, you can show up at your rabbi's office and say, I'm trying to decide whether to buy a gas car or an electric car. However, the electric car costs more. That's going to make it harder for me to pay my daughter's college tuition. All right, that's a riddle, and that's something that is not mentioned or resolved in the Torah. Gas cars and private colleges, they just didn't exist back then. Now, that means you bring this question to your rabbi, and the rabbi's got to sit with you, and they talk with you all night if they have to. Is there any loose equivalent of a gas or electric car? Is there any loose equivalent of a private college or a state school? And you can debate this, and they might say, so-and-so in the Torah said this, which is kind of applicable, and so-and-so in the Talmud said this, which is kind of applicable. Okay, you keep debating all night. In the morning, you still got to make up your own mind. In the morning, it's still your conversation with God. And sitting up all night debating with the rabbi is not about finding the one correct answer. Actually, the debate itself is sacred. Because when God hears you and the rabbi really thinking and debating and really thinking about how can I make my decisions with, mindful of God in my life. God hears the debate and says, now, whichever way you decide, at least I'll know. at least God knows that God is an important part of your decision-making process. So Judaism, it's different from other religions, and I think this is one of the primary fundamental differences, is that you are supposed to think, and you're supposed to be creative, and you're supposed to be rational, and God actually appreciates that. And then what you ultimately decide, that's less important than just the journey and the thinking. So, in modern Judaism, the Torah is the highest authority, no question. That is the sacred text. But the most important text in modern Jewish culture and tradition is the Talmud, because most of the laws in the Torah, many of the laws in the Torah cannot be kept anymore. Now, if you go to your rabbi and you say, like, Rabbi, I'm thinking about killing this other member of the synagogue, then the rabbi can say, the Torah clearly says thou shalt not do that. You don't have to open the Talmud and debate all night about that. But for other things, this is where you got to look. With the temple gone, the biggest change in Judaism is that it moved from the temple to the home. They say in Judaism, like 98% of it is practiced at home. The most important teachers of Judaism are not the rabbis, they are the parents. Primarily the mother, because in Judaism there is still the belief that the mother is going to be the person who has the biggest influence on the children and how the children kind of organize their lives and live their lives. And so Judaism is still matrilineal. It is still a religion in which the question of whether you are Jewish, the question will be, is your mother Jewish? Is she a practicing Jewish person? If your mother is like practicing Jewish and your father is not, they still figure like, well, yeah, it's mainly your mom who's going to shape how you are at home, and therefore you're still pretty much in. If your father is practicing Jewish and your mother is not, then they'll say, well, but a lot of your influence and upbringing comes from somebody who didn't grow up in this, who doesn't live in this, and therefore you kind of have to start as an outsider. The biggest holiday in Judaism is not once a year. The biggest holiday in Judaism is once a week. It is the Shabbat, the Sabbath, which is practiced from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. Synagogue is a Greek word. Synagogue means like the gathering. Actually, in Judaism, what we call a synagogue is kind of more commonly known as the shul. And the word shul means school. The synagogue or shul. Now, in Christianity, when you want to go practice your Christianity, you go to the church. That is your place of worship, your place of practice. In Judaism, your primary place of worship and practice is your home. And the shul is that's the school that you go to learn how to be Jewish at home. So you can't, in Christianity, you can be Christian if you show up for 1 hour a week. You cannot be Jewish if you show up 1 hour a week. You can't just show up for an hour every Friday night, sing the old songs and say like, yes, I'm Jewish. You have to, you only go to that thing so that you can learn how to be Jewish at home all year, all week long. The shul, yes. Um, I made that slide. I mean, this is a picture from The Simpsons. I know. Okay, well, this is a frame from an episode of The Simpsons. Um, so yeah, I did not call it Temple Beth Western. Um, you know, a lot of temples have the word Beth in them. It means house. So like the town of Bethlehem, it actually means the house of bread. So there's one of the whatever 4 Hebrew words that I know. All right. Now, the shul interior, if you walk into a synagogue, what we would call a synagogue, here's what you would see. First of all, you come in, and when you sit down, you are facing Jerusalem. The building has been planned in that way. So you're facing the place where the temple used to stand. And it is toward Jerusalem that you sing your songs and you say your prayers. If you are in an Orthodox service, the rabbi, who is like the preacher, and the cantor, who is the song leader, they are also facing Jerusalem. And that means if you go to an Orthodox service, most of the service, the service leaders, they have their back to you. They're not talking to you. They're talking to God in the direction of Jerusalem. You're talking to God in the direction of Jerusalem. So that can be disorienting to go to. Have you ever been to a religious service where like the person leading the service had their back to you the whole time? All right, but a shul faces Jerusalem. In the back, there is a wooden, it's a chest, or a cabinet. It is called the Ark. Ark is Hebrew, it means box. So like Noah's Ark, it just means Noah's box. Okay, and if you read the instructions that God gives to Noah, the box is in the shape of a shoebox. It's a giant wooden shoebox. It's not in the shape of a boat. It's just like the box in which you're going to put the animals is like the shape of a brick. All right. There's something called the Ark, and inside of the Ark is the Torah scroll. That is the most sacred thing in the synagogue. The Torah scroll, if you can imagine this, okay, you walk into a synagogue, the most sacred, special thing that they've got, the thing that is most cherished there, is a Torah scroll. This is a picture of a Torah scroll. The Torah scroll in a synagogue, if there's a synagogue like in Niagara Falls, they've got one of these. The Torah scroll is still made out of lamb leather, which means there are people in Israel who are raising sheep. They are slaughtering lambs in a very special, way. They are tanning the leather so that they can cut one square, so they can cut a couple of, squares or rectangles of leather from that lamb. They stitch them together by hand. They make their own ink from berries and roots and whatever, the way people did thousands of years ago. They create the Torah by hand. Every letter has to be hand painted. And every mark, like you see this letter here has these like three little like horsehair brush things sticking out of it. Okay, every mark has to be precise. Nothing can be different. So it's done by hand, And yet, if you lined up 6 of these, it would look like they were done by a machine, because it has to be done exactly. And there are people who train for this. They do it their entire lives. This is what they do. They create the Torah by hand. They create the scroll. If you are working on one of these pages and your hand slips and you put in one extra mark, you have to unstitch that rectangle of leather. You have to give it a special funeral service, and you have to give it a special burial, because it is part of the Torah, and yet it is not going to become part of a Torah. So you have to do a whole ritual around that. Then you need to go slaughter another lamb, tan another piece of leather, and stitch it in by hand and start that page all over again. So the creation of a Torah scroll, I know what you're thinking. Man, I would love to have one of those in my living room. Okay, you would need to sell your house. It would cost you, like, probably $60,000-$70,000, because it's got to be done in this way, or else it's not the real thing. So, like a shul, a synagogue, this is that thing that they've got. They really cherish it, not just because it was expensive. I mean, it's expensive because you got to pay these people for all of the time and raising the lambs and making the paint and doing, all of this stuff. But when you finally got it, then that is a Torah scroll. It is really sacred. People have put a lot of like sacred energy into the making of this thing, and you've got it. And the people of the synagogue, they cherish this thing. It's not an idol. You don't worship it. It's not magical. It does not. You can't touch it and have your paper cut get better. Like there's nothing. There's no superstition. It's not a superstitious thing, but it is something that's really special. Now, imagine this. The Torah scroll is still a scroll. It is wrapped around 2 wooden sticks. And at the start of the year, you start here, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning. And then you don't touch it. You touch it, you have this like stick, and the stick has a little carved hand with a finger. That's what you use to keep track of where you are. But such and such services, you read a passage every Friday and every Saturday. As you go through the months, you roll it from one side to another. So, at the start of the year, it's all bundled around this stick, and then throughout the course of 365 and a quarter days, this stick gets slimmer, that stick gets bigger. You get here to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. When you get to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, which has taken you 365 days since you started Genesis, then you do this. Then you have to rewind your Torah scroll back to the beginning. And it's in the same service that you read this line and this line. So, as a way of showing that this is kind of eternal, it's cyclical, it's forever. So what you do at that service is, now imagine this. Imagine if there were 70 people in this room and we stood them up along these walls. And one person starting over here was holding one of the sticks, and they began to unspool it. And then the next person took the other stick, and as it unspooled, they handed it to the next person, and the next person, and everybody around the room then is holding up a piece of this lamb leather Torah scroll. And the thing gets all the way to here, and now the entire thing, and this is a photograph of what this ritual looks like. Now the entire thing is unrolled. And then the person over here begins to re-roll it, and it passes along that way. So that here you were at the very end of Deuteronomy, and then you unroll the entire thing, and then you re-roll it back up, and now you're back at the beginning with the very first line of the book of Genesis. So that's what's happening in this photograph. And if you can imagine this, after you've done this, after you've rewound the Torah scroll, you dance with it. And people take this thing, this like 30-pound thing of like lamb leather. And various members of the congregation, they take this thing, they like jump around and they dance with it. And they're really happy about it. And they really cherish this thing. It's really special to them. And then they hand it to somebody else and they jump around with it. So when we think about like having something that's, you know, on the one hand, the Torah it's really sacred, it's really special. It's really hard to make, and it's really hard to get. But then it's also something that you are supposed to have this kind of loving and very affectionate physical relationship with it. Like it is also this physical thing. That really fascinating. This is another one of those things where if you grew up with, you know, if you grew up with a sacred text that looked like this, and where you could, you know, replace it for $12, or you can write in it, or, you know, whatever, and throw it in your backpack. It's really difficult, I think, for us to envision like having the Torah scroll as part of your life. Now, there are also in the synagogue, there's copies of the Bible in Hebrew. In some synagogues, there's also some copies of the Bible in English. Like, it's not like this is the only place. It's not like if you ask the rabbi a question, he's like, ay, now we got to unroll half of the Torah, you know, because I think I remember something from the book of Leviticus. Like, he's got a copy of the Bible. He or she has a copy. But this is the one you use during your rituals, and it's really special. Okay, now, and we're almost done here. Okay, now Judaism is still around against incredible odds. I mean, there have been so many attempts to stamp out Judaism forever. It's still around because it has been so adaptable, because it has been an adaptable religion. So even though we might think like, you know, like no pork, no shellfish, like Jewish people set in their ways, stuck in the past, whatever. Judaism does not see itself that way. And when you look at it in the grand sweep of history, it has survived because it has been adaptable. Okay, now, perhaps we've heard about Orthodox and Reformed Judaism. And what that means is this. Judaism has continued to kind of adapt, evolve, you know, maybe to a certain extent assimilate, kind of do what it needs to do in order to survive, in order to not get wiped out. About 200 years ago, there was a debate within Judaism where some people said, you know what, if we adapt one more thing, if we assimilate in one more way, then we're really not Jewish anymore. Then we're really just like everybody else. And there was a split with some people saying, no, we stop here. This is as far as we go. And we're going to dress this way. We're going to do this thing with our hair. We're going to put this thing on our forehead. We're going to, you know, whatever. Only do the services in Hebrew. Only do the services facing toward Jerusalem. In Orthodox synagogues, men and women are going to sit separately. A couple hundred years ago, there were some within Judaism who said, This is it. We're not changing anymore. Or else Judaism is over. Or else we're just assimilated and it's done. And then there were other people in Judaism who said, well, Judaism has survived because it adapts, and people are always trying to kill us, and maybe we want to be less visible on the sidewalk, and maybe we don't want to look so different, and maybe it's more important to survive, and whatever, and keep adapting, keep evolving. Times change. All right. I want to present the two sides of this argument as fairly as possible, because it's definitely not up to me to decide. But every family in Judaism had to decide in their personal familial discourse with God, was it more important to stop assimilating and stay this way? Was it more important to keep adapting? People made these decisions. This is why we hear about Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism does not mean the way it was 2,000 years ago or the way it was 4,000 years ago. Orthodox Judaism means like the way it was about 200 years ago. And then there's Reform Judaism, which continues to reform and adapt. So if your friend says, please, will you come with me to a synagogue service? I'd be happy for you to be there. If you go to an Orthodox service, remember to definitely cover the top of your head. There will not be a word in English. The rabbi and the cantor will face away from you. It's going to be very, very different. If your friend says to you, and probably your friend is not going to invite you to an Orthodox service, because you're not really supposed to invite your friend. But they might. If your friend invites you to a Reformed service, then you'll see people who are kind of dressed, kind of Sunday formal. The men have head coverings. Some of the women might decide to have a head covering, but you're not required to. Men and women sitting together, and some of the service, the songs will be in Hebrew, but there will probably be a sermon in English where they sort of, explain things. It'll be a very different, and they'll face toward you. It'll be more like the kind of service that you would recognize, more like the kind of services we have here. So that's what's meant by that. They say that all Jewish holidays, including the Shabbat service, that they all kind of have this in common, and they all celebrate this. The resilience. There's a joke that all Jewish holidays are. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. That is definitely something you could boil it down to. But the real message is that against incredible odds and just near constant threats of genocide and violence, this religion has been incredibly resilient. So I thank you. This I think I think it was in October when I heard about what was going on in Israel. I thought, this would be a good year for us to do like a real series on Judaism, and I feel like this kind of brings us into the modern age. Do we have any questions about this? Yes.
When you unroll
The Torah. Uh-huh. Right. Good question. No, it actually that is its own little holiday. So it's not Hanukkah, Passover, Yom Kippur. There's a special holiday just for that. And like I said, it's the holiday where you've been following this story. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy, the Hebrews are they don't actually get into the promised land until the next book. But at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, they can at least see the promised land. They're about to cross over. And so like you've been following this story from the creation of the world to the liberated Hebrews about to enter the promised land, and just when you get there, then you re-roll it and you go back and you say, oh yeah, now we're going to go back to the creation of the world.
So is it the Torah, it's the first 5 books of the Bible?
Uh-huh.
Would it be the first 5 books, for instance, of the King James Version?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So any Bible on earth is going to start with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those 5 books. Followed by Joshua. So all Bibles start with the Torah. The Torah is not a separate text, and the words in the Torah, like the number of words and like what each sentence says, that's going to be the same regardless. There are a lot of different English translations, but none of them is going to leave out a sentence or feature a sentence that isn't in some other version. Unless some of them are paraphrased, but yeah. The Torah, the first 5 books, there are some who, anyway, those are known as kind of the 5 books of Moses, the books that were like revealed at that time. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, so I thank you all for staying with this series. As I said, on a totally different topic, I'm excited to say that I've got some copies of Shakespeare's Goddess with me if you're looking for something fun to read over the summer. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I will see you in September. Thank you.